All right. So Beitza is talking about the halachas of Yom Tov, and here we go. Beitza shenolda b'Yom Tov, a egg which was laid on Yom Tov. Beishama imrim taychal. Beishama says you could go and eat it. It's not muksa. There's nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong. Beisil imrim layachal taychal. Beisil says you cannot eat it and you have to set it aside. Now, once we're talking about the halachas of Yom Tov, we continue in those halachas. Beishama imrim sa'ar b'chazayis. That uchametz b'kay seves, that in the halachas of Pesach, we say the amount that the amount that would cause a problem of chametz in your house is if it's a starter dough, which is if it's a starter, which is no longer fit to eat, but it's fit to create other dough. It be a catalyst for creating new dough. We say kazayis that you can't have more than a kazayis in the house. The chametz, but real chametz b'kseves, which is a large state. So the isser of chametz is more of a leniency because it could be greater than the isser of having sa'ar in the house. Beis Hill Aimer, and Beis Hill says zev b'kzayis. He says both are a kazayis. Now, okay, now we're going to continue on about if one slaughters a bird, how do you cover up the halakha is that when you slaughter a bird, you're supposed to cover up the blood. How do you go ahead and cover up the blood on Yom Tov? Now it's permitted to slaughter because it's a need for Yom Tov, but maybe something wrong. We can't use the dirt because it might be muksa. So let's see. If someone slaughters a wild animal or a bird, and they both require to have the blood covered, Yom Tov and on Yom Tov, so Beisham says no problem. Dig in the dirt and cover. You could dig and you could cover the dirt. But Basil says lo yishchait. And Beis Hill says you can't go ahead and shecht it. You shouldn't shecht because of this problem. It's better not to shecht on Yom Tov because you might come to the problem of covering the dirt. However, he says, don't do it unless you set aside dirt before the onset of Yom Tov. If you set aside something before Yom Tov, it's not muksa. If one wants to set it, rocks are usually muksa. But if you set aside rocks before Yom Tov, for whatever the reason is, it will not be muksa. The same thing here with dirt. Dirt is one of those things which are esav avanim. They're useless. There's really no use for it. And anything which has no use before Yom Tov is considered a muksa. However, if you set it aside, it's not a problem. So Beis Hill says, if you are shechting birds on Yom Tov, make sure that you have dirt set aside. But he does admit, shem shachat, that let's say you do shecht, shiyichar bedaka v'yichasa. You should go ahead and dig out in the dirt, and you have no choice, so you should cover it. And he also says, Sha'afar kira muchanhu. And also, one could go ahead and use the ashes in the oven. The ashes in the ovens was set aside before Yom Tov because ashes in ovens were technically able to be used on Yom Tov, not Shabbos, but on Yom Tov to keep food warm, to reheat warm. Remember, back then they used to work because the ashes is what created heat. It used to burn out. If there's a pizza oven, you can speak to Brian Levine, right? A pizza oven, the point is really you burn it out and the ashes remain, and that's what heats up the oven, or the bricks retain heat. But it's not the wood fire that creates heat. Really, it's the afterwards, after the embers and the coal that's created. Says the Gemara, b'may askinan. So our question is, so we have said that a egg which is laid on Yom Tov, Beisham says it's permitted. Beis said it's not. So our question is, what type of chicken are we referring? What was this chicken set aside for before Yom Tov? B'may askinan ilim b'tarin gelas ha'medes ta'achila. If it's chicken which was set aside to be shechted. It's a chicken, right? There's two types of chickens. If chickens are set aside to be eventually eaten, and chickens set aside to lay eggs. If it's a chicken which is set aside to be eaten, what's the reason Beis Hillel? Why would Beis Hillel say you're not allowed to use the egg? There should be no problem. It's coming from a chicken it's a byproduct of the chicken. Now, just like the chicken, when I shecht it, I could eat its hindquarters, and you're not going to tell me, the hindquarters weren't prepared for Yom Tov. It was. I set aside this chicken to be eaten on Yom Tov. So why is an egg any different? An egg gets laid from a chicken, which is not muksa, it's a byproduct, so it should be permitted. So we're assuming right now that we're not talking about a chicken which is set aside to be eaten. So what it must be, it's a chicken which is set aside to lay eggs. The chicken itself is muksa because it's useless on Shabbos or Yom Tov because you don't plan on eating it. Therefore, its byproduct will also be muksa. So we assume right now that is the reason for Beis Hillel. On that we say, Umay tamayut Beis Shammai then. Muksa. Now, if that's true, what's Beis Shammai's reasoning? Beis Shammai said that an egg, right now we're assuming it's a chicken that's set aside to lay eggs, and then now we have a problem that if the chicken is laying eggs, it's permitted because it's set aside before. Then it's not permitted because it was never set aside before Yom Tov to be eaten. It's totally muksa. You're not supposed to touch it. So why is its byproduct permitted, i.e. the egg, according to Beis Shammai? And now we say, my kushya, why is that even a question? Dilma Beis Shammai lesle muksa. Maybe Beis Shammai holds there's no such thing as muksa. There's a big machlekes in Hilchos Shabbos, in the Gemara Shabbos, between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda, if there is an idea of muksa. And Beis Shammai famously says that there's no muksa. Rabbi Yehuda says there is muksa. Now we'll see, even Beis Shammai holds there are types of muksa. This Rabbi Yehuda is much more, Shmuel is much more lenient when it comes to different ideas of muksa. There are a lot of muksas which he says are not a problem. And Rabbi Yehuda holds of more categories of muksa. Now, so we say, it must be Beis Shammai holds that Beis Shammai is true it's a chicken that was laying an egg, that was set aside to lay an egg, and therefore technically the egg, its byproduct should be muksa. However, he holds like Shmuel, and there's no such thing as muksa anyway, at least in this category of eggs. At least the category of things not prepared before Shabbos, we have Beis Shammai is relying on Shmuel. And now we ask, do you really think so? Even Shmuel, who holds, usually there's no categories of muksa which are a problem, but noilid, something which was created on Yom Tiv, like an egg, is not permitted. And therefore, you can't say that Beis Shammai is relying on Shmuel. And Beis Shammai says the reason why it's permitted to have the egg is because it's the hen was never muksa to begin with, because he held like Shmuel, there's no muksa. Therefore, its byproduct is not muksa as well. But everyone agrees something which is created on Yom Tov in Shmuel is going to be asur. So now we have a problem. What's the reason of Beis Shammai? So my time to Beis Shammai. What's the reason that Beis Shammai says that the egg is permitted if we're left with no reason? If it's a hen which is set aside to be eaten, then there should be no muksa. Even Beis Hillel agrees there's no muksa, and you could eat the egg because it's coming from a byproduct of an animal which is already set aside. So it must be that it's a chicken which was set aside just to lay eggs. But then, why would Beis Shammai permit it? And if you say he wants to hold there's no such thing as muksa like Shmuel, even Shmuel agrees that something which was born, created on Yom Tov, in Shabbos, will be asur. So, my Tamar Beis Shammai, one answer is, Amar Rav Nachman, L'olam b'tarni gailas ha'medes l'gadol Beitza. Really we're talking about a chicken which was set aside to lay eggs. With the islay muksa, islay nailit. And he holds not like we just mentioned. When there is muksa, there's also the problem of nailit. There's also the problem of anything which was created on Shabbos, on Yom Tov and Shabbos. With the leslay muksa, and when there is no muksa, leslay nailit. There's no such thing as nailit. So nailit and muksa go hand in hand. And therefore, Beis Shammai holds that when there's no muksa, and in this case there's no muksa because the hen was set aside before Yom Tov it was set aside for eggs. But even according to Beis Shammai, there's no such thing. There's no muksa. So the hen's not a problem, and the egg's not a problem because there's no issue of noili. There's no issue of something that's created Yom Tov being asur. And that we ask, is it possible that Rav Nachman would propose such an answer? But we learn that what happens if one has on Shabbos he has his table, and he has his tablecloth, and on the tablecloth he finished his meal, and there's shells and there's bones left over. Now, technically it's garbage, and so that should be muksa. At this point it should be muksa. Well, yeah, there's ways around it. It's disgusting. You can move it. But it's classified at this point as useless, and it's going to be muksa. So how do we clear your table on Shabbos? So Beis Shammai says, no problem. Pick it off the table. No issue. Which sort of falls in line with the idea. Beis Shammai holds no such thing as muksa. Beis Hillel says, no, you should pick up the tablecloth and shake it off into a garbage. So therefore, you shouldn't be picking up the individual pieces of muksa itself. And so therefore, that sounds good. That's in line with what we said. Beis Hillel says there is muksa. Beis Shammai says there's no muksa. But the problem is, Amar Rav Nachman, But Rav Nachman himself wrote, Anu ein lanu ella. Anu ein lanu ella. We only have the following version of the Beitza. That Beis Shammai Rabbi Yehuda, which Beis Hillel Rabbi Shimon, he switches it. He holds, and in this case, Beis Shammai holds that you have to pick up the tablecloth and you cannot pick up the items of muksa. And Beis Hillel Rabbi Shimon, Beis Hillel holds like Rabbi Shimon, who holds that. Before saying Shmuel, I'm sorry, Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon is the one who holds that there is no muksa. So how could it be? So to line it up is that we're trying to figure out how is it that Beis Shammai could hold that you could eat the egg on Yom Tiv. Rav Nachman offers the idea that we're talking about. Really, it's a tarnagol, which it's an egg, which it's from a chicken that was set aside to lay eggs, and therefore, of course, Beis Hillel has to hold this muksa, the eggs muksa, and the chicken's muksa and the eggs muksa. So Beis Hillel is fine. But Rav Nachman offers for Beis Shammai. Why does Beis Shammai say it's permitted to eat the egg? Because Beis Shammai is going to hold that there is no such thing as muksa, and there's no such thing as something created on an issue. And muksa of something that was created on Yom Tov. But on that we say that it's impossible. Rav Nachman clearly changes the version of a Beitza to where Beis Shammai holds like Rabbi Yehuda and things are muksa. So how could Rav Nachman say that Beis Shammai holds in the case of the egg in our Mishnah that how could Rav Nachman hold that Beis Shammai holds in our Mishnah there's no such thing as muksa or noilit? And in the Beitza, when it comes to the tablecloth and the pieces on it, he says that Beis Shammai holds like Rabbi Yehuda that the most stringent, who's most stringent in muksa. Okay, so that's the question. So Amalach Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman gives the following answer: Gabe Shabbos, the Stamlan Tanak Reb Shimon. By Shabbos, we usually go like Reb Shimon. The Tanan Mechatchen es hadluin lefnei habehema es hanevela lefnei haklal, that we were willing to go and cut up the squash in front of the animal, and we could throw the nevela, which is muksa, which is also muksa, to the dogs. Mokim lo Beis Hillel, Reb Shimon. In Hilchos Shabbos, which is the case of the tablecloth, we overall, the Rebbe, the one who wrote the Mishnayos, went with Reb Shimon. When it comes to Shabbos, overall, we are more lenient, like Reb Shimon, and we don't put muksa we don't muksarize Shabbos on so many categories. We have muksa, it's not as bad as it could really be. And the proof is that we have a Mishnah that clearly states with no machlekes that on Shabbos we could cut the squash to give to the animals, the domestic animals, and we could take a carcass and throw it to the wild dogs. And therefore, and both are going to, in the nevela, the carcass for sure is going to be muksa. And therefore, also when it comes to the tablecloth, according to Rav Nachman, one could go ahead and pick up the individual pieces of muksa on Shabbos. Now, however, but on Yom Tiv, Avo, we turn to the top of Beis Amud Beis. Avgabe Yom Tiv, the Stamlon Tanak Rabbi Yehuda. At that point, Rebbe, who wrote the Mishnayos, he went with Rabbi Yehuda. When it comes to the halachas of the holidays of the Yom Tovim of the Chagim, then Stam, if there's no machlekes, usually he went with the idea that we're more stringent on the holidays than on Shabbos. And we went with Rabbi Yehuda. We went with Rabbi Yehuda, who held that Yom Tiv does have much more halachas of muksa. The Tanan, as we learned, Eimafkin Eitzeh min hakayros, V'loy min hakayra shenishbara b'Yom Tov Mokum al Beis Rabbi Yehuda. Because we have a Stam Mishnah that we say we don't utilize the wood that broke on Yom Tiv, and because we say that if it broke, it's set aside, it's broken, we're not allowed to utilize it, and at that point, we put the Beis Hillel like Rabbi Yehuda. So the overall answer seems to be that at this point, when it comes to Hilchos Yom Tiv, the reason why Beis Hillel holds that, Beis Shammai, I'll put it, the reason why Beis Shammai holds that one cannot eat the egg on Yom Tiv, that is because he holds, like in the case of Hilchos Yom Tiv, he's more lenient, which sort of makes sense. Yom Tov is usually more lenient than Shabbos. So Beis Shammai held that we follow the more lenient opinion of Reb Shimon, that there's no muksa on Yom Tov. And on Shabbos he's more stringent, because Shabbos is always more stringent, and he holds there is muksa. Beis Hillel is the opposite. This is Rav Nachman's answer for Mishnah. According to Beis Hillel, it's the opposite. Shabbos is more lenient. There's less chance. There's less categories of muksa, and therefore you could remove the bones and the leftover garbage from the tablecloth. And however, in Yom Tov he's more stringent, and one cannot go ahead and even eat the egg which was laid from a hen it was a hen that was set aside for eggs, and the reason is because of muksa. The hen is muksa, so the egg is also muksa. Now, the reason why on Yom Tov it's more stringent because on Yom Tov there's a lot more weekday activities going around. You could prepare food, you could chef. There's so much more to do. So one may start getting much more relaxed and lenient and start veering off onto the weekday mode, which is on Shabbos. We understand Shabbos you can't do anything anyway. So therefore, we're willing to be more stringent, as a reminder that that today is Yom Tov and there's plenty of things which are forbidden.